Hi, everybody, and welcome to another exciting edition, a comics loving edition, pop culture centered edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am delighted on this episode to be talking with comics creator and academic. Is this true?
That's right.
Yeah, Con Chrisoulis. So, Con, thank you for jumping on, talking with me. Is it Dr. Chrisoulis? Is that right?
No, not yet. It
No?
will be soon, probably mid next year. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So, it is a
Uh,
busy time in your life, I imagine.
it's pretty busy. Yeah. So I'm a senior lecturer in commercial art and illustration at TSI University. That's my academic status. It's been so for the past kind of 5 years. So I've been teaching illustration and comics and graphic novels at TSI University in the UK. And Yeah, I'm undergoing my PhD, which is based on my graphic biographies. Really, it's a commentary on my graphic biography. So that's that work is really the bulk of the PhD, and I'm commenting on it.
Love it, love it. Are you, if you don't mind me asking, are you doing a traditional sort of thesis or dissertation, or is it going to be sort of a visual form?
So no, it's going to be traditional, but in an even in an unconventional way
Oh, love it.
because my work itself, the four works, Dryland, Tales of the Smiths, Rebel, and King, um, which are visual, consists of basically the PhD consists of that work, and I'm
Hmm.
commenting on it. So my written work is basically um, uh, an in-depth commentary of about 30,000, 40,000 words
Hmm.
on my influences, on my references, a literature review I've undergone regarding similar works or works that have underpinned my research and so on. So it's a blend of both, I suppose. If you consider my work as being the visual component.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I love that, love that. And so you
So that's
are,
oh, sorry to interrupt. That's called the
no,
PhD completed works. So it's a fairly new thing. So if a comics creator, graphic novelist, or anyone in the arts has um, work behind them that is consistent or has a theme to it that they've been working on for quite a long time, they can submit that as a PhD proposal and then comment upon it. And that's called a PhD by completed works.
love that. I love that. I was not aware of that.
Have an academic background like a BA and a master's before that,
Hmm.
or,
Hmm.
have you'd have to undergo some kind of research or present some papers before that. So you'd have to have some background, not just you can't just be a comic trader and just come in and go here we go. I've done like 100 issues of Amazing Spider-Man, which is worth a PhD in itself. But yeah,
True, true. The webbing alone.
the living alone,
Yeah.
I'd give John Romita Jr. 10 PhDs.
I would as well. I would absolutely do that. Yeah, you've written about Kirby, illustrated about Kirby, and also really fascinated by your work that focuses on music. I see the evidence of a guitar over your shoulder. So
Right,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So you have the Smiths, Tales of the Smiths. You have Rebel.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
So
love that
there,
nexus.
yeah. Even though both um, so Tales of This has been published. It's a fairly big one.
Hmm.
Um, this originated as a web comic, which I did from 2012 daily for 3 years until 2014. So I was lucky to have a sponsor for that. There was a Greek chocolate company called Eon, which is kind of like Cadbury. I don't know if you know Cadbury in the States.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's kind of like the Cadbury of Greece, and they were searching for comics creators to do whatever to bring in an audience, to or consumers to check out their chocolates. And I proposed the Smiths book to them, and that blew up with the Smiths audience. So they kept on sponsoring me for about for 3 years until I finished it. So it was a
Love it.
daily webcomic, and yeah, that focuses on Morrissey and Johnny Marr's teenage years.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
kind of a coming of age story, but not just. It's mostly a socio political commentary on Manchester too in the 70s and what kind of influenced their ideas and in and especially Morris's lyrics in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and likewise, Rebel Rebel is a it's the longest work I've engaged with. And I've engaged with kind of works for like 10 years, but this fictional ones, but this one's taking me ages. I don't know when I'm going to complete it, but it's looking like it's going to be kind of like the definitive kind of graphic biography of David Bowie, in the
Love it.
sense that I've been working on it since 2015.
Wow.
Yeah, as a weekly web comic. It was bi-weekly at some point, like twice a week. I mean, by bi-weekly, and since 2018, it's been weekly. But yeah, I'm currently on something like episode 380, and
Mhm.
that's produced through Patreon now. It used to be online for free, but now I've got a Patreon backing because I don't have a sponsor, and basically my readers are the sponsors. And every now and then, which is well, basically about 3 times a year, I produce a self-publish a collection of the episodes, the webcomic episodes, and send them to my backers. But yeah, that is um, obsessively detailed to to the point where I'm starting to lose my sanity in terms of when this, or I'm I'm starting to, lose sense of when this is going to ever finish. Because I'm currently at 380. I'm about 7 years in. I've been working on it, I mean, for 7 years,
Uh-huh.
and I'm currently still in 1967 of his life. So it's just jumped on to 1968. So yeah, it's great to discover all these kind of details and stuff about his life and to present them to my readers and Bowie kind of fanatics. Um, and but yeah, it's quite a toll.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds very PhD worthy. Very
Yes,
PhD worthy.
yeah,
Lots of
yeah,
research and lots of detail.
yeah, indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. I mean, yeah, I mean, the majority of the time is spent researching, and then the drawing comes in. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because I don't know if I've mentioned this of both Tales of the Smiths and Rebel Rebel and Kirby, I suppose, and the Kirby book King are mostly quote based. So which is my kind of method of ensuring verisimilitude,
Mhm.
authenticity
Mhm.
to the text. So I spend a lot of time researching old magazines, trying to find quotes which will fit in with my narrative, and vice versa.
Yeah, I
First,
love
create the
that.
narrative, and then try to seek quotes.
Yeah, I love that you present it both with that text as far as written text, prose, and then that you also bring the visual, creates that extra layer, that additional layer of exploring.
Yeah, yeah, and I try to make it clear to the readers that which bits are the written, are the quoted bits. Both through the references down below. So there are, the sources being referenced on the page itself,
Mhm.
but also the when Bowie, let's say, is being quoted, his the font that I'm using is an American typewriter type font, kind of going harkening back to kind of journalism and seeking authenticity through that bit of visual information.
Love it, love it. So you're currently in Greece, is that right?
Yes. Yeah,
What
I'm in Greece on vacation. Yeah.
I was going to ask what the comic scene is like in Greece.
Oh, I was a big part of it at some point in the for almost a decade. I suppose in the noughties.
Hmm.
It's doing okay, but
Yeah.
much like and it's grown quite a bit. I mean, when I because I grew up in Australia, that's where my roots are, kind of in terms of my original comic scene, and I started self publishing in the '90s there, and then I came to Athens late '90s, early noughties, and there was really no scene at all. It was just individuals doing
Hmm.
their pieces, like self publishing a bit, and there was one magazine called Babel, who everyone wanted to get into, kind of like the Metal Hurlant of Greece, and
Hmm.
it was
Hmm.
it was actually um, uh, republishing a lot of raw stories from Raw and Middle Herland, and it also features some Greek artists there. But there was nothing really, and that's where I spent a lot of my time. Where I said I spent like 10 years of my life on a single project, and that was a personal anthology, which kind of made me in Greece in certain ways, I suppose. Not
It's
not
nice.
not in a monetary way, but yeah, it helped make my name there. And
Yeah.
at the end of the decade, with the financial crisis, I left it. It was impossible to find work that you get paid for in Greece. Although the scene was growing, there was
Hmm.
there were anthologies popping up here and there that were paying, and things were doing great. Then the infamous Greek financial crisis kicked in, and it was it was really, really harsh. Yeah, it was harsh all over, but it was especially harsh in Greece. But there is a
Hmm.
scene here. There are conventions that are they're doing quite well. A lot of people are self-publishing. There are courses on comics, so
Love
yeah,
it.
it's nice to see that things are doing well. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Uh,
I'm always curious because I know, the approach toward comics in the United States is it varies. So some folks look at them and say this is art. Some folks look at it and say, oh, this is for kids. And so there's still that pushback, and I kind of live in that on the educator side. But I was just curious about kind of the perspective
yeah,
in other places as well.
yeah. I mean, there's a tradition in terms of republished band dessinée stuff, like Tintin, Asterix, and all that. Or the general public is totally aware of that stuff because they've read it since they were kids.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
but in terms of kind of more mature material, it's still still kind of here and there. But the people that are really into comics, the good thing about it is that there's a tradition of republished material from Italy and France and Spain. So they're kind of more. It's a more of a worldly knowledge of comics rather than you know uh, just a US based one. And it's probably because they're not an English speaking kind of country. But they're totally aware of the alternative or whatever we want to call it, mature American scene as well.
Nice, nice. Was it
Yeah.
the bande dessinée that connected you with comics initially?
No, I was brought up in Australia, so I'm totally a superhero kid.
Oh yeah, yeah. I gathered that with clans being sort of the superheroed mutant sort of approach with
Yeah,
clans, and so I thought that
yeah.
was
So you saw
probably the
Clans.
case.
Yeah, so Clans. My first review ever in 1996. The first thing they wrote on top of the title of the review was "Yikes," which is yet another Image Comics uh superhero comic, something like that. Yeah, I wasn't that much into the Image stuff. I was really, really into my Marvel stuff when I was really young. But
Yeah.
yeah, I grew up on reprints, so I grew up a lot on reprints. Kind of like there's Marvel reprints that were coming out in the 80s, like the original Amazing Spider-Man stuff, like Marvel Tales. That's it. That's the one I'm looking for. So all that stuff. So strange enough, even though I grew up in the 80s, I grew up on a lot of Kirby and Disco stuff and all Don Heck Avengers, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and in Greece, when I came to Greece in the 80s for a couple of years, everything here was still sick in the 60s. It was still stuck in the 60s and 70s. Like stuff like Neil Adams X-Men and stuff like that, stuff that will blow your mind.
Hmm.
Um, so I got a late education in it in terms of the material that I was digesting. By the time kind of like McFarlane and all those people were out in the mainstream scene, we were still reading 60s and 70s stuff, but that wasn't bad. It was bad at
Yeah.
the time because you were a bit behind the stuff that you'd see, at a comic book store, but it was a great education at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the 90s were such an interesting time in comics.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, and I kind of also I was trying to kind of read in based on clans, and I thought there's some Marvel tracing there and
Yeah,
inspiration.
definitely. Definitely, yeah, yeah. I
And
think I've
I
still
appreciate what you
got
bring to
analogs
it.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. I did. I mean, I was really, really into kind of that Humberto Ramos, Joe Madureira stuff. That
Mhm.
that that American manga thing that popped up at some point. That's kind of evident with the clan stuff. But then what happened was I started working at a comic book store in Melbourne, in a place called Windsor, called Alternate Worlds, and so I was working there for a while, and uh, the staff there were really, really scoffing at kind of anything that was mainstream, and so they'd have like a recommended, like a bookshelf with recommended stuff, and it'd be stuff. What was the really cool mature stuff at the time was stuff, the end run of Sandman or
Hmm.
Terry Moore's Strangers in Paradise, stuff like that, and uh Klaus, Dan Klaus and all that stuff. April. And so that I got really into that. And then at some point, I had this um epiphany that I have to leave this stuff behind and start going down another route. I just lost interest in it. And American cinema at the same time, or cinema worldwide, was going through this other phase, through Tarantino and all these great directors that I was starting to access.
Yeah, yeah. I like that connection between comics and film too. That's a big part of,
Yeah,
I think, what's connected me.
yeah, and a great deal of my actually my commentary, my thesis, let's say, is about the intermediality of comics, in the sense that it's a combination of kind of at least two medial forms, which is text and image, but it's
Hmm.
also all these cinematic angles that we use and cinematic language that we're trying to transpose onto the page.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I definitely believe that that's the connection there. 'Cause I've just taken over the illustration course at the university as a course leader, and I definitely believe that comics are kind of more related to film and illustration to fine art and or photography to kind of more static forms of communication.
Hmm.
Um, it's hard to get that across sometimes, but yeah, definitely film and comics are blood brothers in many ways.
I think so. I think so. And if you ever need a support group, I finished a PhD in 2019, so glad to
Oh
talk
wow, that's
about
cool. Yeah.
stories of things, stories of committees, and writing and rewriting again.
Wow.
So glad to
So
do
what
that.
what was the focus of the PhD?
It was actually about film in the classroom as a text. So
Oh wow.
yeah, I worked with a professor, um, Sturge Bitzakis, and he has done a lot with comics and the
Yeah.
literacy that's related to comics and adult readers of comics. So recommend his stuff anytime. But I was thinking, well, Sturge has done this work on comics, and I love comics, but maybe I can talk a little bit about film. So it was about that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I,
For
I
sure.
don't know that it's worth reading. It's out there, but I don't know that
Oh,
those
look,
things are
sounds
written to be
very
read
interesting.
either.
Yeah, somehow, you find your papers all over the place, especially the academia site. Yeah, once you submit it, it stops being yours.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I
And some,
much prefer reading Rebel Rebel. I will say that.
oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely give it a go for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I don't, did you manage to get a read of Rebel Rebel?
Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
I read a lot through Comixology, not selling their site or anything like that, but
Yeah.
I will say a lot of your work is instantly available, even clans on Amazon and
Yeah.
Comixology. So checked out things there, and I love the style that you bring, and I'm a Bowie fan, um,
That's great.
and so I enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm not sure if Comixology is still around. I mean, because I had to change it to Kindle because Amazon had bought out Comixology, I think, a while ago,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure. Everyone's complaining about Comixology, so I've got them both on Comixology and Kindle, but I'm not sure what the relationship between these two apps is at the moment.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. There's some overlap, but I'm not quite
yeah,
sure either. But
yeah,
but they are out there to read, so I checked them out.
that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, absolutely.
So, what's your kind of experience of Bowie as a fan? Have you been a fan kind of like, or what era? That's the first thing
Uh,
I Bowie
I
fan.
I grew up in the 80s, so I probably knew him as a movie actor first through Labyrinth. And I thought, well, who is this person? And then I remember being at sort of this little flea market that was in the town that I grew up in, and there was an album, like a greatest hits album, that was there as a CD, and I checked that out. And so that's been another one of
Hmm.
I've really appreciated his music, but then also the few times that he would show up in film
Yeah,
really stand out. So I loved his performance in Labyrinth, loved his performance in The Prestige as
yeah,
Tesla. Yeah, so there were definitely those connects, and even his couple of moments in Ben Stiller's Zoolander. Um,
yeah.
so I always appreciated him in that way, as someone that was pretty versatile and really
Definitely.
a pop culture icon, and somebody that brought an interesting take.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's exactly what probably interests me in Bowie more than anything. His ability to be really good at a variety of mediums,
Yeah,
creative in these mediums, and in a very kind of really excellent way. So yeah, I'm also, because you talked about the guitar, I'm also a musician and I've worked in kind of concept art bands, which
I
I've
love
written
it.
myself. Yeah, so I've written concept albums and performed them live, very much influenced by David Bowie and Kiss, which is a band, a very comic book band in many ways,
Yes,
which
true.
has connections to comic books at least.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I understand that frustration a lot of multi disciplinary artists have, vent their kind of frustration or their creativity through a variety of mediums,
Hmm.
and kind of trying to decide which one's going to be the one.
Yeah.
And Bowie went through a lot of these phases too, because I'm at a point now in 1967 where he's dropped music and he's decided to become a mime. Um, so it's not, the general public might perceive Bowie as being, mostly a singer rather than kind of a multidisciplinary artist, who did a bit of acting, a bit of singing, but mostly considering him a singer or a singer songwriter. But yeah, he was kind of torn in terms of what to do to with creatively. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the creative genius is you want to do so much and you want to explore so many venues
Mm.
and audiences. I think audiences to some degree, but definitely the industries want to sort of typecast you and say, "Oh, you're this thing now," and to be someone who's creative creates that tension of, well, am I just this thing that happens to be produced a product, or am I somebody that can explore and be okay with that if people don't quite understand what I'm doing?
That's right, yeah, and I mean, in many ways, that's the type of stereotyping that they face, or the public might be prone to, is the
Hmm.
type of stereotyping that I'm also face as a graphic biographer, in the
Right.
sense that a lot of people are expecting me to produce a kind of easily digestible digest form life of an artist, within 80 pages, 150 pages, like
Hmm. Hmm.
a biopic is kind of a classic example of that, or a biopic. So yeah, stereotyping is something that, is we're constantly as artists facing,
Yeah.
and so one thing that I suppose, I don't know why how the conversation went there, but one of
That's
the issues
it's quite all right. It's quite all right. It works.
so one of the issues, yeah, that a graphic biographer might face is whether um they're serving an, an audience, a ready-made audience, the
Hmm.
fan, or whether they're artistically expressing themselves through creating, what is really um, a, a narrative about someone else's real life.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a tightrope that I'm constantly having to balance on.
Yeah, yeah. But I
Yeah,
also I love the range of the fact that you've done Kirby, you've done superhero oriented comics, and you've done sort of musically related exploration. So I love that range
yeah,
as well.
yeah. I mean, in terms of the Kirby book, my best-selling book in Greece before I left for the UK in 2011 was a book called Giant Size Fascists, which was a superhero parody of the extreme right wing in the form of superheroes. So
Mm,
they were on the rise at the time in Greece, and but also there was extreme behaviors from a lot of sides. So I parodied that through Kirby stylings, and that was my most Kirby-ish moment, and it's there where I kind of got to kind of understand his genius. It's really hard
mhm,
to replicate. First of all, the energy of it, not just the squiggle lines and Kirby dots and all that stuff, just the energy of the page and the dynamic kind of angles. Um, and just to make it interesting and not just nostalgic.
mhm,
So
mhm,
yeah, and so the Kirby book has been drawn in my own kind of style or whatever it is now, because I was at some point, what happened was I was working um in well, I should say swiping, but it was my style was so influenced by Kirby at some point where I had to kind of step back and go, okay, where am I in this output? Um,
mhm, mhm.
but yeah, I think the graphic novels allowed me, strangely enough, to kind of step back and rediscover or discover from scratch where my visual style is.
Love that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Even though the expectations are that a graphic biography will be realistic, represent a an artist as they truly are, like in a photographic way.
Mhm.
Um, I think that my own have more kind of cartoonish leanings in many
Yeah,
ways. Yeah.
yeah, and I like that too. It's it's sort of that. How would David Bowie approach this? How does an auteur approach this? Do they take on what's expected and sort of produce, something that matches everything else that's out there in the market? Or
Well,
do you take your style, your voice, and apply it to what's there? So I
yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It's. I mean, it is a hard decision to make, and in terms of commerciality, um, something that looks very photo referenced is something that will, for the general public, seem a bit more authentic or realistic, or it will have they'll feel that it represents the actual life of the artist more than something that is a bit more exaggerated.
Mhm.
So it's again something. It's one of those issues that any cartoonist or comics creator has to juggle with, especially when they're working in nonfiction.
Yeah,
I don't even want to ask someone like Joe Sacco what they're going through when they're facing issues of kind of representation
right,
and
right.
and it's a war torn uh, kind of disaster that they have to cover. You
Hmm.
know, how much do you exaggerate there in terms of cartooning and how torn are you in terms of making things look real in terms of naturalism.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you get that emotion across in a way that's not so immersive that you're deeply affected by it for a long time?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Jan Noel Thon says that comics are represented representation
Hmm.
in the sense that you're not only narrating, but you're also representing the act of
Hmm.
narration. You're involved in this because if someone externally observes you, creating this, you also become a part of this work, in many ways too.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's especially with non-fiction comics, it's really it's a massive issue in terms of how involved you are in the delivery of these facts,
Hmm.
or these um, or what could be perceived as factual.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're coming down to our last couple of
Oh,
minutes.
right. Okay.
Oh,
Jeez.
you're good. You're good. I just want to make sure that we also fit in anything that you'd like to share about web spaces where people can connect, places where they can see Rebel, and anything else that you want to make sure to sort of leave listeners with. And then also, so I don't forget, best of all in the academic journey and completing the big paper and all of those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, same to you. I mean, I wish you all the best, and we'll
Thank
definitely be
you.
in contact in terms of, maybe bring you over for a talk,
Yeah,
maybe remotely, but
love
uh,
to, love to. I'd be glad to.
yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, I'm a permanent member of staff at TSO University as a commercial a senior lecturer in commercial art and illustration. So I've just taken over the as course leader in illustration there. So I'm continuing my role there, supporting the university and students. In terms of comics output, I'm my the work I'm focusing mostly now on is Rebel. So I've just reached 1968 in David Bowie's life. I'm on episode 380 with some hidden episodes on my Patreon. It's about episode 400. So
Mhm.
they're 400 self-contained stories, really. So if someone can, you can find more information on it on my Instagram. If you just look at Con Chrisoulis, my name, or at Rebel Comics. Or if you go to Facebook and write Rebel Comics or Con Chrisoulis, you'll find both my page on the comic there and my own profile. But yeah, if you look up the work there, it will take you to my Patreon, which is where really someone can read all the material. So starting from just $1 a month, someone can read all the previous material and 4 episodes each month because it's a weekly comic. But if you pay a bit more, something like I think it's $7 a month, every 3 months you get sent a collection. So much like this, so you get sent
Oh, nice, nice.
an issue which has about 32 comics pages in it. Um, so yeah, I mean, most of my patrons are the high tier ones who get sent the books. Yeah, so I'm mostly focusing on that. And in terms of appearances, I'll be doing Thought Bubble, which is I don't know if you're aware of Thought Bubble.
Mhm, mhm.
It's the UK's biggest independent comics creator festival, and that's real close to where my the university is. It's up north in Yorkshire. Um, and so I'll be there selling my wares, promoting my work. That's in November, in the kind of mid-November, I think the 14th, 15th of November. And yeah, otherwise, yeah, I'm still, in the barracks, drawing away, working along, getting that boys work down, and hopefully I'll find a life down. I mean, hopefully I'll find publishers to get everything collected too soon, like I did with Tales of the Smiths. So yeah, I did this for 3 years, and this ended up as 440 pages. I'm slowly reaching this milestone already with Rebel. So I think the first volume, if I ever get it collected from 1947 to 1970, is gonna probably be something like 600 pages long.
Wow, wow. Very cool, very cool. Very prolific. And thank you, Colin, for taking some time to talk with me.
Great,
And
great,
then glad to be in touch. Glad to connect anytime.
great to be on your show. I love your show,
Well,
and
thank you.
yeah, I love all the guests. Arlen recently, and Noah and Skyver. Great, great shows.
Thank you so much. And thanks for being part.
It's great. Talk soon, Jason.
Sounds great.